All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the second book of the Lost Year of Merlin series. We are on book 2, I just said that, but this is the 7 Songs of Merlin, and we read the prologue last night where the council of all of Finkyran species gathered to decide what to do with the king and who to rule and who should carry the harp, and it turns out, shockingly enough, Merlin has the heart of a wizard and is carrying the flowering harp around Finkyra to restore the blighted lands. So now we're on chapter 1 called Rescuer. Reaching the top of the rise, I hoisted the flowering harp a little higher on my shoulder. The first rays of dawn streaked across the sky, painting the clouds scarlet and crimson. Ruby light licked the farthest hills, igniting the few spindly trees that stood like forgotten hairs on the horizon. Yet despite the flaming trees, the hills themselves remained darkened, the same color as the brittle blades of grass under my leather boots, the color of dried blood. Even so, as my feet crunched against the parched hillside, I began to smile. I barely noticed the chill wind that pierced my brown tunic and bit my cheeks, for I felt already warmed by my task. The task I had pursued now for more than 3 weeks, the task of reviving the land. Just as the great wizard Tuatha, my father's father, had done long ago, I had borne the harp across the remains of the fields and forests, and, like Tuatha himself, I had coaxed those lands back to life, with surprising ease, I might add. The harp responded more easily with each passing day. It seemed almost eager to do as I wished, as if it had been waiting for me since the days of Tuatha. To be sure, even in the midst of my success, I realized that I was no wizard. I knew only the barest rudiments of magic. I couldn't have lasted a day as an apprentice to someone like Tuatha. And yet, I was something. I had saved my friend Rhea from sure death at the hand of Stangmar. I had brought down his whole castle, on top of destroying the plans of his master, Rita. It seemed only fitting that the Great Council had entrusted the harp to me, and that that harp should do my bidding. As I approached a shadowy outcropping of rock, I noticed a dry gully that ran beneath it. Clearly, this gully had not seen a drop of water in years. Whatever soil had already been blown away looked as cracked and withered as a sun-baked carcass. But for a lone, scraggly tree wearing only a thin strip of bark on its trunk and bearing not even a single leaf, nothing lived here. No plants, no insects, no animals of any kind. Smiling confidently, I rubbed the knotted part of my staff, feeling the deep grooves in the wood and smelling the spicy scent of hemlock. I laid it on the ground. Then I pulled the harp's leather sling off my shoulder, careful not to tangle it with the other cord of the satchel of herbs that my mother had given me in our last moments together. Holding the harp in my left arm, I observed its intricately carved floral patterns, its inlaid strips of ash, its carefully spaced sound holes. The strings, made of goat gut, gleamed darkly in the early morning light, and the neck, joined with the sound box to the pillar, curved as gracefully as the wing of a swan. Some day, I promised myself, I would learn how to make a harp such as this. As another cold gust blew against me, I drew my fingers across the strings. A sudden burst of magic poured forth, a lilting, magical magic that lightened my heart like nothing I had heard since the singing of my mother so long ago. Although I had now carried the harp over dozens of these hills, I had not grown the least bit tired of its resonant song. I knew I never would. A small sprig of ferns lifted from the ground and started to unfurl. Again I plucked the strings. All at once, the hillside sprang to life. Brittle stems turned into flexible green blades of grass. A rivulet of water started splashing down the gully, soaking the thirsty soil. Small blue flowers, sprinkled with droplets of dew, popped up along the banks. A new fragrance filled the air, something like lavender and thyme and cedar combined. I drank in this melody of aromas, even as I listened to the harp's own melody still pulsing in the air. Then my smile faded as I recalled the fragrances of my mother's collection of herbs. How long it had been since I had smelled them. Since before I was born, Ellen the Sapphire Eyes had surrounded herself with dried petals, seeds, leaves, roots, shavings of bark, and whatever else she might use to heal the wounds of others. Sometimes, though, I suspected that she filled her life with such things just because she enjoyed the aromas. So did I, except for dill, which always made me sneeze. Yet far more than the aromas that she nurtured, I enjoyed my mother's company. She always tried to make me feel warm and safe, even when the world did not let her succeed, which was all too often. She provided for me during all those brutal years in Gwynedd, called Wales by some, without ever asking for thanks. Even when she made herself aloof and distant in the hope of shielding me from my past, even when I nearly choked with rage at her refusal to answer my questions about my father, even when I struck back in fear and confusion by refusing to call her by the one word she most wanted to hear, even then I loved her. And now that I understood at last what she had done for me, I could not thank her. She was far, far away, beyond the mist, beyond the ocean, beyond the rugged coast of Gwynedd. I could not touch her. I could not call her the word, Mother. A curlew chirped from the branch of the tree, pulling my thoughts back to the present. Such a glad, full-throated song! I plucked the harp strings once more. Before my eyes, the tree burst to life. Buds formed, leaves sprouted, and bright-winged butterflies flew to the branches. Smooth, gray bark coated the entire trunk and limbs. The roots swelled, grasping the bank of the stream, now swiftly tumbling down the hillside. A beech. I grinned, seeing its burly branches reaching skyward. The breeze rippled its silvery leaves. Something about the sight of a beech tree always filled me with the feeling of peace, of quiet strength. And I had saved it. I had brought it back to life, as I had this entire hillside, like so many before. I felt the thrill of my own power. The great council had chosen well. Perhaps I did, indeed, have the heart of a wizard. Then I noticed my own reflection in a puddle that had formed between the tree's roots near the bank. Caught short by my scarred cheeks and my black, sightless eyes, I stopped smiling. How had Rhea described my eyes on the first day we met? Like a pair of stars hidden by clouds. I wished I could see my own eyes, again. Seeing with my second sight was, of course, better than blindness. I could never forget that miraculous moment when I had discovered that I could actually see without my eyes. Yet second sight was no substitute for real sight. Colors faded, details blurred, darkness pressed all the closer. What I would give to heal my eyes. Burned and useless though they were, I always knew they were there. They reminded me constantly of everything I had lost. And I had lost so very much. I was only 13, and I had already lost my mother, my father, and whatever homes I had known, as well as my own eyes. I could almost hear my mother, in her encouraging way, asking whether I had also gained anything. But what? The courage to live alone, perhaps, and the ability to save all the blighted lands of Finkyra. I turned back to the beech tree. Already I had rescued a good portion of the dark hills, stretching from the ruins of the shrouded castle, now a sacred circle of stones, almost to the northern reaches of the haunted marsh. Over the next few weeks, I would bring life back to the rest. Then I could do the same for the rusted plains. Although it held more than its share of mysteries, Finkyra was not, after all, a very big place. Setting down the harp, I stepped nearer to the beech. Laying my hands on the smooth silver bark, I spread my fingers wide, feeling the flow of life through the imposing trunk. Then, pursing my lips, I made a low, swishing sound. The tree shuddered, as if it were breaking free from invisible chains. Its branches quivered, making a swishing sound much like my own. I nodded, pleased with my skills. Again I swished. Again the tree responded. This time, however, it did more than quiver, for I'd given a command. Bend down to the ground. I wanted to seat myself in its highest branches. Then I would command it to straighten again, lifting me skyward. For as long as I could remember, I loved to perch in the top of trees, regardless of the weather, but I had always needed to climb there myself, until today. Hesitantly, with considerable popping and creaking, the great beech began to bend lower. A section of bark ripped away from the trunk. I craned my neck, watching the highest branches descend. As the tree bent before me, I selected my seat, a notch not far from the top. Suddenly, I heard another swishing sound. The tree stopped bending. Slowly, it began to straighten itself again. Angrily, I repeated my command. The tree halted, then started bending toward me once more. Again, a swishing sound filled the air. The tree ceased bending and began to straighten. My cheeks grew hot. How could this be? I dug my fingers into the trunk, ready to try again, when a clear, bell-like laughter reached my ears. I spun around to see a leaf-draped girl with gray-blue eyes and a mass of curly brown hair. Glistening vines wrapped around her entire body as if she were a tree herself. She watched me, still laughing, her hands on her belt of woven grass. "Rhea!" I should have guessed. She tilted her head to one side. "Tired of speaking beach so soon? You're sounding like a Celt again." "I'd still be speaking to the beach if you hadn't interrupted us." Rhea shook her brown curls, enmeshed with leaves. "I didn't interrupt your speaking, only your commanding." Exasperated, I glanced up at the tree, which by now stood perfectly straight again, its silvery leaves tossing in the wind. "Leave me, will you?" The curls shook again. "You need a guide, otherwise you might get lost." She looked with concern at the beech tree. "Or try something foolish." I grimaced. "You're not my guide. I invited you to join me, remember? And when I did, I didn't think you'd try to interfere. And when I started teaching you the language of trees, I didn't think you'd use it to hurt them." "Hurt them? Can't you see what I'm doing?" "Yes, and I don't like it." She stamped her foot on the ground, flattening the grass. "It's dangerous and disrespectful to make a tree bend like that. It might injure itself, or even die. If you want to sit in a tree, then climb up there yourself." "I know what I'm doing." "Then you haven't learned anything in the last 3 weeks. Don't you remember the first rule of tree speech? Listen before you speak." "Just watch. I'll show you how much I've learned." She strode up to me and squeezed my elbow with her strong hand. "You remind me of a little boy sometimes. So sure of yourself, with so little reason." "Go away!" I barked. "I saved this tree, brought it back to life. I can make it bend if I want to." Rhea frowned. "No, Merlin, you didn't save the tree." Releasing her grip, she pointed at the instrument lying on the grass. "The flowering harp saved the tree. You're just the one who gets to play it." All right. That is the end of chapter 1. So tomorrow we will read chapter 2 called A Fitting Welcome. Have a good night.